Welcome to the Stoned Roadie Show again. Craig Reed Stoned Roadie Show, the most famous roadie in rock and roll history, or the most stoned roadie in rock and roll history, I guess we could say. We have a special guest here today. Craig was going to come on today, but he wanted to make plenty of room for Ken Peden to tell his story. Ken Peden is basically a sound engineer guy that was working for Lynyrd Skynyrd at the time when the plane went down. And Ken survived the plane crash. Of course, he had some significant injuries, but he was able to walk away from it with those injuries. And he, along with Artimus, Pyle, and Franc, was able to go through the swamp of the Mississippi forest that they crashed in and find a farmhouse. And a lot of people don't really know anything other than the Artimus Pyle story. So welcome to the Stone Roadie Show, Ken Peden. It's nice to have you. I was talking to Ken a little earlier, a little bit about his background and so the way he got started. And Ken, can you just sum it up, how you got into the sound engineer business and how you started working for Lynyrd Skynyrd?
Sure. Well, like I said before, my bright idea was to build a sound system and rent it out to bands because at the time the sound systems were pretty much junk. So I got this company in Dallas to hire me called Showco, who had some of the better sound systems at the time. So I was going to steal all their ideas and then build this sound system. But after I went to work for them, I figured out that these guys really got it together. And boy, I don't want to compete with them. So I'll just keep working for them. And they basically taught me the basics of how the systems work and go together. And after a couple of weeks, they sent me out on the road, David Bowie tour. Did that for a while. Then we did the Kinks tour. The Kinks was my first monitor gig, and the band wanted to kill me first show because I was pretty green. But chief engineer kept pushing me back up there and said, "You'll figure it out." And I figured it out. And after that, we did, I don't know what we do later, but we did Joe Cocker and a bunch of one-offs. And then I got hooked up with Johnny Winter, Edgar Winter, his brother, then the Winter Brothers tour. And on the Winter Brothers tour, we did the Day on the Green, big stadium show in Oakland. And there were like 8 bands. And I'm sound checking these bands. And I had this really big system we'd built for Edgar, the Helen Keller system, they called it. I said, even she could hear this thing. So Van Zant heard me, working this system out there. And he came up to me right before they were doing their sound check. And he said, "Man, they want us to use this B system. It's kind of a piece of junk." He said, "I've seen this thing you got, and it's really nice. Would you do sound for my band when it comes time for us to play?" I think they were at the time like second bill, third bill. So I did the gig. Almost got in a fight with Artimus at first show. There's a little story I'll tell you about that. I'm trying to figure everything out, and there's 7 guys and 3 girls on the stage, and this is 10 people. A lot to deal with.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure all this out, and I'm twisting knobs and EQing things, and Artimus is getting real impatient. He comes over to the console, and he goes, "Where are you from?" And I thought he was going to jump on me. I'm looking around like, is there a mic stand or something I can hit this guy with? And I said, "I'm from Mississippi. What about it?" He goes, "Well, I'm South Carolina. How you doing, man?" Just like that, The guy's scary. And so anyway, he calmed down. I just realized later on, I think he was doing acid or something. I don't know. So anyway, everything calmed down. We did the show. And after the show, Ronnie came back and he thanked me for doing it. And I gave him Showco business card. And my famous line was, "You ever get big enough to do your own tour, man, give me a call." And a few months later, the office called and they said that we've got the Skynyrd contract. And we're going to go out and do this tour, and they've requested you to come and do stage monitors for them. So we started doing one show after another. I can't remember. I think we did something like 60 cities in 100 days, really burning at both ends.
So Ronnie took your card and And Ed King kind of did the same thing. He told Ronnie, hey, if you ever need a bass player, look me up. So Ronnie takes that information, he holds on to it, and you can tell he utilizes that. So then you guys, you did a lot of touring with Skynyrd, and you were telling me a little something about the plane that you guys had before the Convair 240 that went down. And you were telling me compared to that, it was a Cadillac.
Oh yeah.
Tell a little bit about that plane.
I believe the model is Convair 680. I'm not sure. But what they do is, I think that the Convairs, that model plane was built in the early 50s. And it was a KLM airliner, 52 passenger, and they sold it. They sold it to Jerry Lee Lewis. And Jerry Lee, they ripped all the seats out and, you know, put the couches and the nice stuff in it and little TV monitors. But they took the engines off of it, the old piston engines, and they put Rolls-Royce turbines, which is a turbine driving the propeller as opposed to a, you know, piston engine, which really improves the performance of the airplane. And it was a great airplane. And I used to sit up front in the jump seat. There's a seat you can fold down between the pilot and the co-pilot, and put the headphones on and listen to all the traffic and watch them take off and fly and land and all that stuff, because I was really big into aviation. And like I said, compared to the other plane, it was Cadillac. Now that was the first tour I did with them. After that tour, we did the Japan, England, European stuff, came back, took a break, and then met them down in Georgia. I believe at Georgia, we did rehearsals. And I checked my memory. I think that's the first time that I saw Steve Gaines. I can't remember if Steve, no, I take it back. Steve was on all the other tours. First time I saw Steve was the Day on a Green gig. So anyway, did rehearsals, and then we go get on the plane. And we got on this plane, and it looks the same. I can tell it's a different plane. Propellers are a little different. We got on it, and we got ready to take off. First thing I noticed is he gets out on the end of the tarmac there, and he does a run up, which is normal for airplanes. But I never saw Les Long do it in the other plane because it was turbine engine. He did the run up checklist before, you know, while we were taxiing. But this guy, he's running up both engines, and he's running up for a long time, checking everything, I guess. And it just kind of gave me the feeling that he wasn't quite up to snuff, the same pilot as Les was. We're on the same level. So anyway, I blew it off, and we took off. And when we took off, that thing rolled and rolled and rolled down the runway. And I'm thinking, shit, is he going to get off the ground or what? Finally lifted off, and it did a really, really slow, slight incline climb. For the other plane, I was used to him to, you know, taking off and pew, gone.
So that
was my
that kind of bothered you.
Yeah, it did bother me because, you know, it was going through my mind at the time. It wasn't too long before that Jim Croce had gotten killed in Louisiana. And what happened to them is they were in a plane, and it took off, and it failed to gain enough altitude, and he hit pine trees at the end of the runway. So I'm thinking this as we're going down the runway, I'm going, man, how far away are we from the pine trees at the end of this thing? But it finally got up and cleared. So that was my first experience with that plane. Which did bother me. It definitely bothered me.
And then after that incident, I think most people that I've talked to that were on the plane that went down, I think, you know, the real scary part, I believe, began in Lakeland. Is that correct? When the
yeah, it was trying to think exactly what city we did. Georgia, then we did a couple of shows, Gainesville, Lakeland. I think it was the flight from Lakeland to Greenville.
Yeah.
The right engine started sputtering. It was mid-flight. It was in the middle of the night. We always flew at night. And there was a flame coming out the exhaust of this engine. This flame is a good 3, 4, 5 feet long. Now, that's a little scary, you know, when you look out the window of your airplane and there's, you know, blowtorch blowing out the exhaust. And I think Gene Odom went up, told the pilot, co-pilot comes back, and then they adjusted something and the flame went out. Found out later on it was the carburetor was running extra rich. So what was happening is the fuel was going through the engine and not being burned completely. And then when it hit the exhaust, it ignites.
Right. Yeah.
It looks like a jet. So that was the problem with that, which became a problem later on the other flight. So that was the first real alarm.
So what was the feel like with everybody that was flying the plane? Was everybody like aware of that and getting nervous because of that? And did it give them any animosity as far as being on the plane that you knew of, or what was the feel for the plane as far as the guys flying on the plane?
Well, nobody was real comfortable with it. You know, it was different degrees of being worried about it. I wasn't that worried about it because when I used to fly up front with Les Long on the other plane, I was just asking him questions all the time.
Yeah.
You know, about how far will it glide when you lose an engine and so on and so forth. And it had a really good glide ratio. So I figured, it's a twin engine plane. We lose one engine, we can still fly on one engine. Not that big a deal. And I think we did a show that next day, and I got the word that there was a mechanic going to meet us in Baton Rouge, and they were going to change carburetors out or something to that effect. So I didn't worry about it too much. Now, my understanding is that there was Cassie and a couple of other people really were wound up about it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't that afraid of it.
So after the Greenville show, and then the next day when you guys were getting on the plane, was it a normal day getting on the plane, or were there people kind of talking about getting on the plane then? Was there any kind of hesitation in anybody as far as getting on the plane, or did everybody just seem?
Not that I was aware of. I've heard the stories about, Cassie didn't want to get on the plane. She wanted to ride in the truck with Bud Rock and Little Jim, the equipment semi. And I think Ronnie basically wanted to keep the group together. He didn't want them scattered. So he said, no, we all need to travel together. So I don't know what the personal conversation went on with them, but she got on the plane. There was, a couple people were wound up about it, but then I would hear, but they're going to fix it in Baton Rouge and it won't be a problem. So at that point, we didn't worry too much about it.
So once you guys got on the plane, where was it that you were seated?
I was seated. I looked up the chart once. I think they'd call it seat 15, but basically it was over the right wing where the wing attaches to the fuselage. There's a couple of rows of seats there. And I've always been told, I wasn't sitting there on purpose, but I've always been told that that's the strongest part of the airplane because that's where the wings attach to the body and it has to be reinforced. Didn't think much of it at the time, but I guess it was a good move to sit there. But I'm not sure if it made a whole lot of difference where you were sitting on that plane, because when that thing hit, I got ready for the crash and I knew it was coming. Strapped in, put a blanket in my lap, put my face down, lock your arms under your legs. The whole thing they tell you on airliners, in case you're going to crash. Or they used to tell you. They don't say that anymore because they don't want to scare people. But it ripped my seat completely out of the floor. Just ripped the bolts out and just threw me up through the front of the plane. I was told this. I don't remember it. I was knocked unconscious. But I was told the seats were ripped out. So didn't make a whole lot of difference exactly where you were sitting. What made a difference is if you were ready for it or not. Because the really strange thing, and it bothered me for a long time, I was sitting in the same row with Cassie. And she was sitting by the window and I'm sitting on the aisle seat, 2 seats in this row. And we're looking out the window because it was October sky. It was beautiful. The sun was going down. It was orange and you could see the contrails from the other planes. It was just gorgeous sunset. And we were sitting there talking about that and what we were going to do that night. We had the night off in Baton Rouge. And she got up to do something and walked up to the front of the plane when all this trouble started. And then when they said, everybody strap in, she came running back down the aisle. So just to make it a little faster and expedite the situation, I just jumped over to the next seat to let her get in. So me and her actually switched seats. And for a long time, it kind of worried me because, you know, it killed her and I got hurt, but not that bad. And then I realized it wasn't the fact that we had switched seats, but what happened, and I do remember part of this, I got in this crash position and Cassie at the last minute popped her seatbelt loose and stood up. Because if you stood up, you could see down the aisle and see through the windshield of the plane. And I think she got up and stood and right when the impact hit and just threw her forward.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's some good information there. So yeah.
And I was strapped in my seat. Like I say, I ripped my seat out of the floor, but at least I was balled up and it didn't, you know, break my neck and I understand that she had her throat cut or had some really deep cuts or something. And I'm pretty sure that's what killed Cassie. It wasn't the seat she was sitting in. It was the fact that she didn't brace herself and she stood up. Now, I mean, you're standing up and you hit something in a car or a boat, you're going to go flying forward.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happened to Cassie.
Who else were you sitting around on the plane? You remember anybody specifically?
Not really. I mean, everybody, almost everybody was there. I do remember that off to the left side, there was like a couch and it had seatbelt straps in it too. And a lot of the times, Alan would sit there and Dean and a couple other people, you know, and shoot the breeze and that kind of thing. What occurred to me later on was usually Ronnie always sat in the back of the plane because there was a poker table back there. And those guys played poker all the time on the plane.
Yeah.
This particular day,
okay, we're back with Ken Peden. We had a little technical difficulty. The Zoom meeting dropped on us. So we're going to pick it right back up where we left off. And I believe you were talking about usually Ronnie Van Zant would play poker, and then he was having a bit of a backache and he was tired. And so pick it up from there, Ken.
Yeah, like I said, he normally was in the back of the plane at the poker table. But this particular day, he had a back issue and headache or something. So I think Gene had given him a sleeping pill and maybe some kind of pain pill. And he was laying down. The only place to really lay down on this plane was in the aisleway in front of the passenger compartment on the way to the cockpit. So he was laying down there and Leslie was, you know, massaging his back and trying to work out the kinks and that kind of stuff. And when all this trouble started. And of course, when that happened, you know, she got up and ran back to her seat. And he got up and sat in the most convenient place, was on the couch. And I brought that up because had he been in the back of the plane playing poker as normal, he may have survived the crash. But the fact that he was up there in the front and sitting on a couch, basically sideways with a seatbelt on, wasn't very secure. Not as secure as sitting in a seat strapped in. And I think that's probably had a lot to do with it, because from what I've been told, it threw him into a forward bulkhead and he hit his head, and that's what killed him. So I just thought that was a little strange. You know, all these little things that happen, you know, going to affect your life.
So whenever you noticed the plane having an issue, what was the first thing that it did? What was it doing that brought to your attention there was an issue?
The same engine we had that problem with on the flight before began to sputter. And I'm thinking, well, you know, that carburation problem is back. But instead of continuing to sputter, it just shut down, literally stopped turning. And I thought, oh, God, you know, great. Now we're flying on one engine, but I knew the plane could fly on one engine. And about that time, the left engine started to sputter.
Oh, damn.
And then it shut down. I think we were somewhere about 12,000 feet. So all of a sudden now we're a glider. Got no power. And Gene Odom ran up to the cockpit, had a little conversation. One of the pilots came back and he was pissed off, cussing, saying something to the effect of, the pilot said, oh shit, what do you do when your pilot says, oh shit? You know, so everybody strap in. So we all strapped in, and I got into that crash position. And, you know, for a while, I'm looking out the window and I'm watching this thing going down and going down. And you can see, you know, we were over a forest. And I'm thinking, well, he's got to find a field here to put it down. And there was a couple of fields. I think, well, he's probably going to belly land it in, you know, one of those fields. As he got lower, I heard the gear go down. I think it was the gear. And I went, man, what little bit I knew about flying, you don't drop your gear when you're in a glide path with no power, because it's like putting the brakes on. You know, it started creating more drag. So when you drop the gear, the glide path went from a slight angle to a steeper angle because it was slowing down. And then it began to hit trees, you know, and it sounded like somebody just beating on the plane. And bam, 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 bam. And it was about the last thing I remember. It just knocked me out completely, because when I came to, I was actually on my feet, standing outside the plane, holding my head, because, you know, I'm just waking up from a bad dream. And then I remembered, oh, wow, the plane was going down. And Artimus and Franc were there with me. And it was almost completely dark. You could barely see anything. You could see the basic outline of the plane, but I knew there was nothing we could do except go find some help somewhere.
Yeah, I've been knocked out like that before, and it's hard to explain. You know, you don't remember much of anything, and going back and trying to remember that, I'm sure is.
Oh, I tried.
Yeah, you can't.
Gone.
So then you guys were all standing together there, and then what did you? Who was kind of like saying that we need to go get help? Was that all of you together were mentioning that, or?
Well, Artimus was the first one to speak up. He said, "Man, we have got to go get some help, because we can't help these people, because, you know, the plane was mangled and it was basically dark, like I said." So he says, "We got to find some help." And you could see through the woods, you could see a little bit of a light. And what it was is one of those security light posts that people put in their yards.
Right.
So we figured, you know, that's the only civilization around. We got to head toward that light. So we started walking through the woods, and we came up to a creek, a small creek. And my left arm was banged up pretty good. I had a concussion and broken nose. And I'm thinking, I'm not crossing that creek because I can't swim in this condition. So, you know, I'm likely to drown. I'm not going to cross the creek. And Artimus just jumps in the middle of the creek, you know. And he goes, it's not very deep, you know, just past his knees. So at that point, I said, okay, we'll wade across the creek. But, I mean, that's just the way he was. So wade across the creek. Finally got to the edge of the woods, and right on the edge of the woods is barbed wire fence, cow pasture. So we, you know, crawled through the barbed wire fence and started walking across this cow pasture toward the light. And I noticed there was cattle all over this place. And I'm thinking, I'm banged up, not in real good shape, survived the plane crash. All I need now is for a bull to come out here and run over my ass. So we kept walking. The cattle didn't bother us. We got to another barbed wire fence at the edge of a road. And we're climbing through this barbed wire fence, and this pickup truck was flying down the road. And I mean, he was flying, and he went right past us. We were waving, you know, trying to get him to stop. He went down the road about half a mile, turns around, comes flying back again. And we're going like, hey, and he went right past us again, pulled up in a driveway in his house, and that's where the security light was, at his house. And that was Johnny Modes. Anyway, so he pulled up in a driveway. So we're walking down the fence, and we walk across his lawn up toward his house, and he pulled a shotgun out of the truck and fired that thing over our head. And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, I survived the plane crash. The bull didn't kill me. Now this redneck farmer is going to shoot me. And I hit the dirt. And I think everybody else did too, except maybe Artemis didn't. I don't know. He was pretty ballsy. And we were yelling like, hey, you know, we were in a plane crash on the other side of that cow pasture. And I think Johnny at that point realized we were telling the truth. I can't blame him for acting the way he did, because, you know, we were beat up and bloody, and they all had long hair, like
Right.
like a caveman walking around.
Yeah.
And later on, I found out that at that point there was a helicopter flying around with a spotlight. It was Air Sea Rescue trying to find that plane, and Johnny thought it was the sheriff chasing escaped convicts. There was a pea farm not far from there. So Johnny had good reason to be concerned. I would have been too.
Yeah, I think that all made sense when you see a helicopter and then
and then three mangled guys come walking out of the woods.
So at that point, I guess you went inside the house and tried to call some people or whatever, and then you were taken to the hospital then, right?
Right. He took us in the house. His wife was in there, and we sat on the couch, and I kept trying to go to sleep, pass out, and Artimus was slapping me, going, "Don't go to sleep." He knew a little bit more about that than I did.
Yeah.
Because you have a concussion, you're not supposed to go to sleep.
Right. Yeah.
So he kept slapping me on, "Wake up, wake up." And I said, "Look," I said, "you got to call Air Sea Rescue. They're going to be looking for us, and tell them where we are." And the lady got on the phone. She made a couple of calls, and then she said, "Okay, well, we're going to put you in a car and drive you to the hospital." So me and Franc got in the car. I can't remember. I think Artimus stayed behind because he was going to show him where the plane was or something to that effect. And we're driving to the hospital, and this lady is just, she's got it floorboarded, and she's down these windy country roads, and it's freaking me out. I said, "Lady, damn, take it easy. I just survived a plane crash. I don't want to get killed in a car wreck."
Right.
So, but anyway, she got us to the hospital, and as we got to the hospital, these guys, they were so together. They had gurneys, doctor, nurse lined up on the sidewalk outside the emergency room entrance, ready for casualties to come in. They put me on the stretcher and took me in and went to OR and knocked me out, I guess. They stitched me up because when I came to again, I was in my hospital bed. So
you and Mark were the first two to arrive at the hospital before everybody else, and then so you never. How long were you in the hospital?
I was only there overnight. My parents, it was 100 miles from where I grew up. So my parents had heard on the radio that the Skynyrd plane had gone down in Macomb, and they knew I was on that tour. So, they got in the car and drove to Macomb to the hospital, not knowing if I was dead or not. And they got to the hospital, and they came in after I came out of OR. And so my mother and my father showed up, and the doctor said, "Well, let him stay in here a few hours, and then we'll release him to you, and you can take him home." Because basically, he just had a broken nose, arms banged up, concussions, cuts, but nothing serious. So they released me the next morning, and I went home.
Mark, I guess he was just about the same as you. Did he was released pretty fast too, or was he?
I don't know. I kind of lost touch with everybody because I'm in my own hospital room. The only person I really saw after that was Judy Van Zandt. She was, I guess, making the rounds, and I saw her walk by the open door, and I called to her. I didn't know Judy that well, but I'd met her a couple of times, knew who she was, and I said, "Judy," and she came in and gave me this big hug. And at that point, I think I knew that Ronnie had died. I can't remember exactly, and she must have known too because she was pretty broken up. When she comes in and gives me a big hug, says, "You're okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And she left and continued making the rounds to everybody else. But I never saw anybody else from the crew or the band because when they released me, I'm still kind of dinged up and dizzy. I went and got in the car with my parents, drove me home, and everybody else is still in their own rooms or in OR or had been flown out to other hospitals. Never saw anybody after that.
And the crazy thing is that you went on to get your pilot's license after that.
Yeah, I was some years later. It was about 1990. I was married to a girl. She was lifer Air Force, and she was stationed over here at Keesler Air Force Base, and they had an aero club. So you could go down to the Aero Club and go to ground school and, you know, get an instructor, and they teach you how to fly. And they had their own airplanes. You could rent them for, I think it was like $70 an hour or something like that. So her and I both went down there and got instructors and learned how to fly, because I was always interested in aviation. I loved it. And I just loved the idea of flying my own plane. So, you know, we got licensed. She got hers. About a year later, she got transferred to Greece. There was an air base there in Heraklion, and it was nicknamed Club Med, because if you were in the Air Force, this is the place you wanted to be. It was on the beach in Crete, Greece. It was beautiful.
Wow.
And I mean, it was great. And they had a airport nearby, and they rented airplanes there. So we went down there and we'd rent airplanes on the weekend, and we'd fly around the Greek islands. I mean, not many people get to do that kind of stuff.
Well,
But,
you got right back. You got right back on the horse. You know?
Oh yeah. Well, within 3 or 4 days after the crash, I'm staying at my parents' house. At the time, I was living in California. You know, a lady out there that I'd known for a while. So about 4 days later, you know, Showcoke, you know, they were in touch with me, and they said, "Look, we'll fly you home." Sent me a ticket. So I got on a plane, and I'm flying to San Jose, and everything's going good. So we got in over the Rockies there and started hitting turbulence and shook up the plane pretty good. And I started kind of freaking out a little bit. And the stewardess comes over and she goes, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I'm a little worried." She goes, "Well, have you flown before?" I said, "Yeah, I've flown before. I was in a plane crash about 4 days ago." She goes, "Oh my God, let me buy you a drink." And so I said, "Give me a Jack Daniels. In fact, give me several of them." But I had a few Jack Daniels there just to calm me down a little bit, because I was fine up to then. When that thing started bumping around, it's like, man, it's bringing back some bad memories.
Well, that was a great story. You know, a lot of people, I don't think they've heard a lot of things that you told in that story, and I think they're going to be really interested to hear this. And your ability to be able to talk about it was outstanding. You know, you seem to, I guess it's so long ago that it's probably easier for people, but I couldn't imagine, you know, having to go through something like that. Really appreciate you coming on and telling it. The people that watch the Stoned Roadie show, you know, they like all kinds of Skynyrd stories and things. And, you know, that plane crash is part of it. So Craig was wanting to get different perspectives of what happened. And that's
well, that was plane crash is only one, so I got a lot of stories about Skynyrd. We'll get back to that.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to that. So we'll get you back on again and dissect some more of those stories. Appreciate you coming on, Ken, and we'll have you back. And thanks a lot.
Very good. Thank you. See you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.